Dr. Krennic, Luthen Rail.
What a pleasure.
Hello everyone, and welcome back for Part 6 of Andor Season 2 is the greatest on-screen Star Wars since 1983. In the first 5 parts, I gave my thoughts on episodes 1 through 5. So today, in Part 6, I will be continuing on with Episode 6. A quick little disclaimer before we start. Assuming that you've seen the season already, you don't have to watch the first 5 parts in order to understand Part 6. I am merely dissecting everything in an episode-by-episode sort of fashion. If you want to watch the first 5 parts before watching this one, then you can find the link to those videos in the description. However, if you want to just start here and then jump around as you see fit, then that's totally fine as well. So, without further ado, let's not waste any more time and jump straight back into it. We begin the episode on Port Steergard on the Rima trade route. This is the pickup point where Luthen is grabbing Cassian after he left the mission on Gorman. After Cassian enters the ship and Luthen jumps into hyperspace headed for Coruscant, Luthen asks for Cassian's assessment on the Gorman front, so Cassian relays the opinions that he came to believe about them at the end of episode 5. They are impatient, their strategies to combat the Empire are very flawed, and they're just overall not coordinated or skilled enough yet to take on a force like the Empire. Luthen doesn't see it that way though. He sees it as a prime opportunity regardless of whether the Gorman front is ready to fight or not. He's thinking about the bigger picture here on a more long-term galaxy-wide scale. Picture a planet like Gorman, wealthy, high status, held in high regard amongst the Empire, fighting back and rebelling against the Empire that they are a part of. Just the fact that a planet like this is even fighting back will send shockwaves throughout the galaxy, and perhaps set precedent for more planets to fight back. And even if they are crushed badly perhaps, it ultimately will serve the greater good because now it makes the galaxy more likely to fight back and resist the tyranny of the Empire, since they've seen a planet like Gorman do just that. But this is something that Cassian is concerned about when he asks the question, and if it goes up in flames? So Luthen simply responds by saying, it will burn. Very brightly. And that's something that Cassian isn't able to accept at the moment. Perhaps he sees it as too extreme. Perhaps he doesn't want to play with the lives of innocents so willy-nilly. But I think what Cassian doesn't realize, perhaps naively, is that these people's lives are going to be played with regardless. It doesn't matter if the Gormans are on their best behavior. This is the Empire we're talking about. This is an evil that cannot be reasoned with. So I definitely side with Luthen's thinking on this one. Yes, open rebellion, even if they're not ready, will likely result in more deaths of people in the short term, but it's better for them to stand up now and do something instead of letting the Imperial noose tighten and tighten around their necks, to the point where they literally cannot do anything. This is a great opening scene that further emphasizes this growing divide between Luthen and Cassian. They ultimately want the same thing, but their preferred methods on how to get there, how they think things should be done, is starting to differ greatly, clearly setting up how Cassian and the others are going to break away from Luthen in the near future. Cut over to Coruscant. We get a quick exchange between Luthen and Clea over comms. They're speaking in code, but it pretty much translates to this. Luthen is dissatisfied with Cassian. He thought that seeing the Gorman front in person would make a difference, but it hasn't. Clea responds by saying that she knew that this was going to happen. Luthen wants to give it another go, however, so he asks if she's going to deploy somebody else. And Clea says that someone is en route as they speak. And on Gorman, we see that Vel is sitting on the steps of Palmo Plaza, so obviously she is the one that has been delivered for this second go-around. Elsewhere on Coruscant, Cassian returns home to Bix, and the two embrace each other passionately as he initially comes in. All seems to be well at first. Cassian is home unscathed, Bix seems to be okay, and as a matter of fact, Bix cleaned up the place nice and pretty, which Cassian likely sees as a good sign. But then Bix mentions that Luthen stopped by while Cassian was away, and Cassian's demeanor changes immediately. He is extremely angered by this, especially considering that Luthen never mentioned this to him during the entire ride back to Coruscant. Cassian is visibly paranoid about this revelation because he knows the kind of person that Luthen is. He never does anything without a reason. So why would he come and visit Bix now of all times, when he knows that she needs downtime and while he's off planet? That does not sit right with him. The trust that Cassian has for Luthen is really starting to dwindle. What Luthen's reasons for coming by are, he doesn't really care, because as we've seen earlier in the arc, Cassian's main objective as of recent has been protecting Bix. That's what's ultimately fueling his frustration frustration because he doesn't like that Luthen is hovering around her right now while he's not there to be present. Elsewhere on Coruscant again, this time with Mon and Perrin, the first time that we've seen these two this arc. The two try and iron out their schedule for the coming night. There are 80 new Imperial senators, all hosting some type of dinners, so they have a lot of events in the coming nights that they are going to be coming and going between. Not really a whole lot of substantive material said here though in this brief scene, so let's move on. Back in Luthen's shop, Cassian has come by at night to confront Luthen, and Luthen points out how extremely reckless he is being. What would happen if people or cameras picked this up? Then the footage or information got to the Imperial authorities, and they were able to put two and two together from this meeting. It is extremely dumb on Cassian's part, and Luthen calls him out on it. But Cassian doesn't care. He only cares about the fact that Luthen has been messing with Bix behind his back. But Cassian being here is just proving his point, which prompts Luthen to question both of their abilities to serve the cause. Cassian was soft on Gorman, and seems to care more about Bix than the cause. Bix is clearly not in a mental state to serve at the moment, so from Luthen's rationale, what use are either of them to me? Cassian is infuriated by this, saying that he's given him everything. But Luthen responds by saying, this is everything? This fury? This lack of control? Violating every code we live by? Luthen then states that Bix has to pull it together, or Cassian's going to have to decide at what point she becomes too big of a problem. Which pretty much translates to, if Bix continues to be a liability on his ability to serve, then he's going to have to choose the girl or the cause. But Cassian definitively states that, no, it's not up to him, it's up to Luthen. Whether Luthen chooses to cut Cassian off or keep him in, that's up to him to decide. But ultimately, Cassian is going to stick by Bix's side. Cassian tells Luthen that we are going to take care of Bix, or you don't get me. It is a hard line in the sand that Cassian is drawing, and Luthen is going to have to decide which side of it he's going to stand on. I think this serves as one of the last straws dividing Cassian and Luthen. Luthen by this point I think is pretty convinced that Cassian maybe isn't willing to give everything or sacrifice everything to take down the Empire, when contrasted to himself, a man who has given up everything in pursuit of the cause. There is a fundamental difference of mindsets and priorities between the two, and Cassian's care for Bix is what in my estimation leads to them splitting from Luthen by the time we see them in episode 7 on Yavin a year later. The next morning at ISB headquarters, Partagaz pulls Hirt and Lonnie aside to inform them of some news. Dr. Gorst and his brutal interrogation methods have been deemed too valuable to be just a one-man ISB show, and so his methods will be expanded into a program. The Navy has donated a facility that Dr. Gorst's program will be using, so Partagaz wants Hirt and Lonnie to represent the ISB's interest in the program. After Partagaz leaves, the one thing I found of interest here is that Lonnie tells Hirt to take the lead on this one. Maybe he's just doing this so that it appears as if he isn't too invested in the project, although we all know he wants the intimate details so that he can report them to Luthen. I don't know, maybe I'm fishing a little bit on this one, but perhaps he feels that he's close enough with Hirt now that he feels comfortable letting him do some of the work for him that he'd otherwise would have done himself, and then just have Hirt fill him in later, which can of course play to his advantage. It would be a little suspicious if Lonnie was so invested in everything and obviously trying to soak up as much information as possible. It could have raised some eyebrows given enough time, so some subtle but smart work here by Lonnie as an effort to blend in. Cut back to Gorman. Vel waits in a cafe, what appears to be the same cafe that Cassian and Enza had their conversation in the previous episode. As Vel waits patiently and is visibly a little nervous, in walks Cinta, who it appears has also been assigned on this mission by Luthen. So the two of them are here to fill a similar role to what Cassian was here for. They are here as advisors. They'll help the Gormans walk through what needs to be done in order to pull off this plan of theirs, but if they don't like it or they think it's too much of a risk, then they'll walk from it. Once the two get on the same page as it relates to rebel stuff, they drop the act and get more personal, both confessing that the only reason that each of them are here is because the other is here. The more overarching thing that I took from this conversation is that it kind of mirrors Cassian and Bix's relationship in a way, in the sense that another romantic relationship has been put under a great deal of suffering under Luthen's leadership, albeit for very different reasons. As it relates to Vel and Cinta, they have been separated for so long and they aren't allowed to see each other unless Luthen allows it. But the two are similar in the sense that it shows just how detached Luthen is from emotion and and humanity. He has to be. He sees it as the only way in which he's able to most effectively be the force that he needs to be in order to take down the Empire. He merely sees the people under him as pawns, and doesn't care much about the emotional aspects of each of his soldiers' lives. Perhaps it's an oversight on his part, perhaps it isn't. That can be debated. But once again, we see an example of a romantic relationship in turmoil due to Luthen's methods and protocol, which will result in, as we all know, Vel splitting from Luthen. Especially after Cinta dies, it comes into focus for her that she was robbed of the potential for happiness because of Luthen. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's move on. Cut back to ISB headquarters. We get a brief exchange between Dedra and Partagas. Dedra believes that a rebel attack on Gorman is imminent, thanks to their ISB agent on site. Partagas, in an almost threatening manner, is sure to remind Dedra that she is walking a very narrow path here, and that Cyril is never to find out what all of this is. All the work that he has been doing on their behalf, what it is all really in greater service towards. She tells Partagas that she reminds herself of that fact constantly, and it seems by her facial expression that perhaps that fact is unsettling to her. But in contrast with Cassian, she isn't willing to disobey orders in favor of her personal emotions, as it relates to her lover. So an interesting little parallel there that the show pokes at a little. As we cut over to Gorman, Dedra is in fact correct, because with the arrival of Dedra and Cinta on Gorman, the Gorman front is now beginning to plan their attack on the Imperial shipments. Vel lays out the plans for the attack and makes it very clear to all the Gorman front members that they are not to think or question the orders that she is giving out. They merely need to obey, and that is all. They all need to play their parts perfectly in the plan, or else it has the potential to all go awry, something that Vel has personal experience with doing, as we saw in the Aldhani heist back in Season 1. The group seems very on edge, very hesitant to trust Cinta and Vel, two complete strangers. So Cinta makes it clear that they are the experienced ones here. They are here because the Gormans have never done anything like this before. This only works if they follow what they are saying and respect the chain of command. When Vel says that they plan to carry out the operation the following night, I think this serves as a little bit of a wake-up call for the group. Like, oh, okay, this is actually happening. Let's do this then. And the group seems to begrudgingly accept Cinta and Vel's leadership. Back on Coruscant, Bix has woken up in the middle of the night and has decided to take some more drugs while Cassian is asleep. So even while Cassian is here, Bix can't help herself but take the stuff to try and relieve some of her emotional trauma. Cassian does end up waking up, however, and asks if Bix is alright, as she blankly stares out the window. I think Cassian knows here that something is not okay. Bix is quick to point out that the light out in the distance on top of one of the far buildings is flashing. I guess this flashing light sort of acts as a bat symbol, but for Cassian. So that's a neat little detail that I found pretty cool, to be honest. Bix insists to Cassian that she's going to go with him, whatever the mission he gets may end up being. Cassian responds by agreeing. Now, whether Cassian is actually sincere in saying that, or whether he's just saying that to try and soothe her in the moment, perhaps is up for interpretation. But I think the bigger thing of note here is that Cassian is clearly very worried about Bix, and it only seems to be getting worse with time. At this moment, I feel like he isn't exactly sure how to help her. I bet he feels pretty helpless. We don't get much more until we return to these two, so let's move on. Cut back to Gorman. At night, Vel and Cinta find themselves in a room together in private. There's definitely a sense of awkwardness at first that you can feel. They talk about the mission, but you can tell that they'd much rather get personal. They're just perhaps a little apprehensive to do so. That's until Cinta is the one to open the floodgates, and the personal feelings start pouring out. They both feel that they have been deeply damaged by being apart from each other, and would serve better by being together. But Luthen doesn't feel that way. He thinks of them as assets that are more useful to him separately than together. But Vel insists that that is something that is going to have to change moving forward. She's going to talk to Luthen about it. The two console each other, okay, implied lesbian sex scene, I think you can fill in the blanks. Cut back to Coruscant. Two very quick scenes here, so I won't dwell on them. Mon Mothma leaves the Senate after the end of some kind of chamber meeting. Notably, she's reluctant to utter the Imperial loyalty call, I guess you could call it that, further emphasizing how she's growing further and further apart from the Empire. Luthen and Clea depart the gallery for the party, but they, as we all remember, are on duty to extract that bug. So cut over to the party. Skolden's party to be specific. Mon and Perrin exit the car and are greeted by Bail Organa, who notably has been recast, now being played by Benjamin Bratt. I know it was a little bit of a hot topic online that Jimmy Smits didn't come back to reprise his role as Bail, especially considering that he did play the character as recently as in the Kenobi show, but they couldn't get him for whatever reason that may be. I haven't really looked into it too deeply, but Benjamin Bratt does really well in the role in my opinion. I was thoroughly convinced that this was the same character, so I I have no complaints there. Thought I'd get the elephant out of the room before I continue. But anyways, simultaneously as the party is going on, all the stuff related to the Gorman plotline is being intercut, and they're cutting between them pretty quickly. So I'll go through the Coruscant section first, and then I'll cycle back to the Gorman stuff afterwards. So Perrin and Mon enter the building and are quickly greeted by Skolden. Mon doesn't seem super intrigued to see him, but you can tell that she's putting on that act that she's so good at doing. Skolden escorts them through the party before we cut over to Luthen and Clea, who have already arrived. Luthen shows off one of his rings to some of the partygoers, so effortlessly playing the Luthen persona that most of the galaxy knows him for, while off to the side, Clea talks to Skolden's assistant. We also see that Lonnie, Hirt, as well as Legret are here as well, having some drinks, trying to enjoy themselves. These brief snippets, in my estimation, mostly serve to just let us know who is all here and who is where, establishing the scene a little bit before the show gets into the nitty-gritty. So Luthen pulls himself away from whatever conversation he might have been having and approaches Mon, naturally pulls her away to discuss the more important things. Mon gets pretty serious immediately and asks Luthen about Vel. Luthen's robotic response is along the lines of, what, is there something she needs to know? Completely just overlooking the fact that these two are cousins and maybe, just maybe, they have a vested interest in each other. And since Vel is stashed away under his watch, they almost never get to see each other. And that's exactly the type of response that Mon gives, saying that she cares about her. Yes, Luthen, I do in fact give a shit about people. And Luthen just kind of gives a blank stare, very telling if I do say so. But they are interrupted by Perrin and Skolden's wife. They tell them that the Skolden collection viewing awaits. So Mon and Luthen will have to finish this conversation another time. Clea approaches Lonnie, and he seems pretty shocked to see her there. Clea very intensely says to Lonnie to do everything that she says, because as we'll soon see unfold, he will play a pivotal part in providing a distraction for herself so that she can remove the listening device. She takes Lonnie's arm and starts walking with him to catch up with the rest of the group. So cut to inside Skolden's showroom, and a wide variety of different characters are present in the same room. The most notable include Mon, Luthen, Clea, Lonnie, Skolden, as well as Director Krennic. You immediately can tell that this is a very tense environment now. As revealed by the dialogue, Mon and Krennic are generally used to bitching at each other in a variety of hearings, presumably in some type of Senate subcommittees, but here they find themselves in a completely different environment. These two are totally polar opposite personalities, and you can tell that they're trying to compose themselves in a room full of others rather than just yell at each other about a wide variety of issues related to the Empire that they probably would have done otherwise if they weren't here. Also, the fact that Luthen is here, one of the leaders of the rebel movement, acting out his persona, present in the same room with one of the highest ranking Imperials in Krennic, it seems as if throughout the scene, there's a very thin layer of expression on Luthen's face, holding back all the emotions of rage that he most definitely feels towards this man. It's not every day that he comes face to face with a man like this, so it's definitely a test of character to see how well he's able to compose himself without letting his emotions take control. A test that he most definitely passes. Meanwhile, in the background, we see Clea escort Lonnie to one of the pieces located on the other side of the room, the one that has the listening device attached to it. Lonnie is absolutely terrified about what they're doing. He's well aware now of how risky this is. And I'm not really surprised by the way that Lonnie is acting, because he isn't used to doing this sort of thing at all. The super high stakes intense missions on behalf of the rebellion that he's truly allied to. He's merely a plant. All he's got to do normally is play his part convincingly and relay the information that needs to be relayed. So executing in a situation like this is something that is completely out of his wheelhouse. So Clea tries to get him to remain calm, but throughout the scene, he struggles greatly. The stakes of this scene here also can't be understated. This isn't just removing a thing from a thing, no. The future of the rebellion is possibly on the line here. If Clea doesn't extract it in time, and that bug is found after they leave and its origin is discovered quickly, then Luthen very well could be captured or killed before he tries to leave Coruscant, or could be hunted down by the full weight of the Empire. Does that mean that everyone else under him is dead? No. But he's the unifying piece that runs the show. It would be equivalent to the Emperor dying in Return of the Jedi. Did the Empire die immediately after the Emperor died? No. But it slowly died off over the years before eventually withering away completely. It was never able to return to its full strength. And the same could be the case here for the rebellion if Luthen either dies soon after or is captured soon after as a result of the failure here. The fragile state of the loosely connected rebellion could very easily start to wither away without his presence. distance. So the stakes here are absolutely monumental to the galaxy at large. As the group makes their way around the room, Clea is starting to run out of time, and removing the bug without drawing attention to herself is clearly quite difficult. It looks like she is going to run out of time until Mon and Krennic get into a spirited debate, you could say, about a battle called the Battle of Carmine and what happened to its people. This debate stalls the group's progress from continuing around the showroom, thus giving Clea just enough time to barely manage to extract the device. Now, whether egging Krennic on like this, getting him all riled up, in a pretty futile debate, let's be honest. It's not like either of them are likely going to change their minds right here and now. It's for interpretation whether Mon is in the know about the operation currently taking place right now, because it's never explicitly stated whether she's in the know. So whether she's having this debate merely as a means of providing further distraction for Clea, or whether this was just a spur-of-the-moment confrontation is definitely up for interpretation in my estimation. I could see you making a case for either or, but regardless, the result is the same. Clea is able to remove the device, but just in the nick of time, because right as she finishes, blood dripping off of her hand, the group makes their way over to the piece that Clea and Lonnie are standing at. By this point though, the hard part is already done. All they need to do is keep their cool and not look suspicious in any way. When Krennic asks Clea why she is so fond of this piece, clearly recognizing that she's been standing over here the entire time, it seems as if she's stumbling a little, not being able to think on her feet of how to properly respond. I think Krennic's presence is so intimidating perhaps that she sort of freezes up. She looks over to Lonnie for help, and Lonnie is finally able to step up and save the situation from being extremely awkward, being short and to the point about what makes the art piece so interesting. It appears that they've managed to make it through this one, and the show cuts away. The final thing we see from this plotline is Clea and Luthen exiting the building. Clea hands Luthen the listening device, and speaks in a tone that suggests that Luthen owes him big time for this one. And he definitely does. Clea came up very clutch and has managed to save his and her ass. The two joke about how they should have killed Krennic while they were up there. A little bit of morbid humor, but it definitely fits the tone, which brings this plotline to a close. Okay, now let's circle back to the Gorman stuff, shall we? Partagaz enters the ISB control room and tells the entire room to clear out. Everyone in the room leaves except for Dedra. This is obviously implying that they intend to use the room in secrecy for overseeing the soon-to-be active situation on Gorman. While this is going on Gorman itself, the team prepares for the assault, making sure that everything that they need is in place. Cyril watches on from a nearby rooftop, informing Partagaz and Dedra what is going on as a sort of play-by-play relay of information kind of guy. We see Vel and Cinta split up, each going off to oversee their respective aspects of the plan, and the stage is now set for the action to come. The transport drives by slowly, everything seeming to be on schedule. As the transport drives by the explosives a short time later, and the explosives are detonated, the rebels proceed with hijacking the transport. Everything for the next handful of minutes goes according to plan. They are working quite fast, and the plan is going smoothly. Perhaps a little too smoothly. If you've ever watched a movie or TV show, then you probably guessed by this point that something was gonna go wrong. And right on cue, something does. So Lazine, who you will remember as one of the passionate speakers from back in episode 4 at the underground meeting, who is not a part of this mission, rounds the corner and demands to know what is going on. But Sam tells him to get lost. Understandably, the Gorman front doesn't have any time for this. The last thing they need is any outside variables causing any type of disturbance. But Lazine, who was already characterized as a very outspoken and bold type of person the first time we were introduced to him, doesn't like that response from Sam at all, and shoves him out of the way to see what is happening for himself. This causes Sam to draw a blaster on Lazine and try to reestablish himself as a threat to him, to forcefully get him to do as he commands. Notably here, as you'll remember back in the planning stages of the mission, Cinta and Vel made it very clear that they were the only two that were going to have blasters. That was a very important detail because the fewer blasters there are means that you'll be less likely to use them, obviously, and shooting off blasters will attract a great deal of attention to them and could possibly hinder their escape. So Sam has broken one of the very important guidelines of the mission. Lazine quickly approaches Sam, and the two have a wrestle for control of the gun, resulting in a blaster shot accidentally going off, and it's soon revealed that shot ended up striking Cinta off in the distance, resulting in her death. Now, this was a plot point that stirred up a lot of controversy. Rightly so, I think, because I myself was a little mixed on it too. And it wasn't that there was anything wrong in the setup to the event, that was all fine. I just think that the death itself, the way it unfolds, was a little too convenient for my liking. I understand that they're trying to hammer home the point that this was a meaningless death, a meaningless tragedy, and because I think it's clear that that's the point that they are going for, I'm willing to cut this plot point a little bit of slack, even though, as I've just stated, I wasn't the biggest fan of how it unfolded. I think a large reason for the scrutiny is just due to how far away Sam and Lizine are from the transport and the rest of the people when the shot is fired. If this altercation maybe happened like 15 or 20 yards away from the transport, and Cinta maybe started making her way over there when she saw the physical altercation brewing, then I think that would have been much more realistic. I would have preferred that actually. But this being the version that they ultimately went with is far-fetched enough where it certainly raised a lot of people's eyebrows, questioning its believability. But I mean, it's not the end of the world. I just think that it might have been a little bit of an oversight by the writers, and I wish they would have chosen alternate means of executing the same outcome. Everyone seems shocked by what just occurred, and they rush to get Cinta on the transport and out of here immediately. Vel in particular seems completely broken and seems to not fully process what just happened. As the crew makes their escape, even though you could call this mission a success, because they acquired exactly what they were after with only one casualty, everyone in the transport seems very sad and in disbelief. They probably aren't used to seeing this kind of thing up close, seeing someone get shot and killed in person. In particular, Sam is very emotional, even crying a little bit, because he probably feels responsible for the whole thing. Which of course, I think you can attribute a lot of the blame to him. Sure, Lizine acted way too brash, perhaps, but if Sam didn't have that gun with him in the first place or had taken it out and threatened Lizine with it, then what transpired wouldn't have ever happened in the first place. Vel is pretty pissed off that Sam is crying in the transport. She believes that he doesn't deserve the right to cry. Whether Sam realizes it or not, the weight of what just occurred is pretty severe. He has just taken away an extremely experienced and quite valuable asset to the rebellion. A rebellion and fight, mind you, he so desperately wants to be a part of. Vel's response to Sam is a blend of both tactical but also emotional. You can feel the emotional strain in the words that she's saying. This event will now be ingrained in Sam's mind wherever he goes for the rest of his life. And whatever responsibility or acting accordingly that he should have displayed on this mission, he certainly owes it now. You can sense the hidden meaning behind what Vel is saying to him. You owe it to the rebellion to make up in some way for the tragedy that you have caused, the stupidity and disregard for following orders that you have shown. It's a great scene that I think benefits from taking a more mixed approach in Vel's response. She very easily could have gone one of two ways, either speaking solely in rage or trying to be uplifting, but I think the approach that they went with is much more realistic. It gives depth to what she's saying and benefits the scene greatly. For our final scene of the episode, we cut back to Coruscant, but where exactly we aren't quite sure at first. However, moments later, we see a real Dr. Gorst. Not a hallucination Dr. Gorst, the real Dr. Gorst this time. So it looks like we're going to get an update with him. I think we assumed by this point that we were going to, since he was talked about earlier in the episode. So as he makes his way up through his new building and enters one of his interrogation rooms, he is greeted by an armed Bix. Now, I remember some people being a little confused by this scene, and some weren't the biggest fans of it, because it kind of seems to come a little out of nowhere. There's no build up to it at all. And I can understand that sentiment because it definitely does. How did Bix and Cassian know where Dr. Gorst's facility was? How did they get into the building in the first place? I don't think the scene itself is bad though, or doesn't make sense. Quite the contrary, actually. I think it's reasonable to assume that Lonnie relayed that new information regarding Gorst to Luthen or Clea, and then they relayed it to Bix and Cassian. Perhaps Luthen relayed that information since, as we saw earlier in the episode, Cassian was hellbent on getting the point across to Luthen that he needed to aid him in getting her better, or else he was going to be done with him. So perhaps Luthen saw this as a prime opportunity for Bix to act on some of that anger against the man who did this to her, with the hopes that if they were successful, she'd be able to put everything behind her. Is this the mission that the blinking light on the building from earlier was signifying? It's not entirely clear, but I think that's probably the most likely scenario. I will concede though that it would have been nice to see that on screen and not just jump from point A to point B and have to fill in the blanks for ourselves. It wouldn't have taken away from the episode at all and actually would have added to it in a positive way. Now perhaps the justification for not deciding to include it is because when we see Cassian and Bix at the beginning of episode 7, they are on Yavin and have split off from Luthen's faction. So it may have been a little odd if we see Cassian and Luthen in this scene, where their relationship is at the worst it's ever been, then for Luthen to do something that would realistically help repair that relationship, but then by the beginning of episode 7, Cassian and Bix have split off from him, implying that they are no longer on speaking terms. Yeah, that might have been a little odd from a character trajectory standpoint, so they probably went with this because it was a little smoother from that perspective. Either way though, I think a connective scene should have been included, but that's just my 2 cents on it. I think we could have filled in for ourselves what might have happened in the year off screen as to why Cassian and Bix then split off from Luthen. Anyways though, looking at the actual content of the scene, this was definitely a big but necessary hurdle you could say that Bix needed to get over if she was ever going to get better. I sort of interpreted this scene as her physically banishing her emotional trauma away. Getting revenge on the man that first caused her all that pain in the first place, I think ties the bow up quite nicely. And now with that part of her past fully behind her, now she can really begin the process of returning to full strength. She exits the facility, shooting an Imperial guard on her way out, links up with Cassian, and Cassian proceeds to flip a trigger that blows up Dr. Gorse's building in the background, obviously implying that he fused the building while Bix was making her way up to the interrogation room. And that is it. That is it for episode 6. So taking a look at episode 6 in its totality, it shaped up to be yet another great episode for Andor Season 2. While Cassian himself doesn't get as much screen time in this episode, probably the least amount of time since episode 3, all the time he has on screen is not wasted. This episode does a good job at setting up the eventual schism between Cassian and Luthen. We understand each of their mindsets very well by this point, why they believe the things that they believe, and what things they are willing to sacrifice. Cassian at this point in the timeline has much more of a personal connection with people that he is close to, and thinks about people on a more individual level, while Luthen is not that at all. He doesn't care much for the personal emotions of others, and really only operates with the mindset of how will this advance my greater goals. This episode does a good job of showing that, so it's believable that by the time we reach episode 7, Cassian and Vel, 2 of his most important operatives that we've seen, split off from him due to those fundamental differences. The Coruscant section, I think, takes the cake for my favorite part of the episode. It is certainly the most tense in my opinion, and is written so intricately. Every person in the scene, every movement they take, the dialogue and expressions on their faces just adds more and more layers to the scene. As well as the dialogue throughout is superb, doing an excellent job of fleshing out some of our characters and their mindsets even further. In particular, the back and forth between Mon and Krennic was fantastically written banter. And finally, the Gorman stuff, while a bit clunky towards the end, I think still provided for good drama. One of the big key takeaways that I like to see is the show is doing a good job of showing us the natural progression of the rebellion. In season 1, the rebellion is really just scattered groups across the galaxy. In Arc 1 of Season 2, there's somewhat of a loose connection between groups, but it's still very unorganized, lacking any sort of unified hierarchical structure. And here in Arc 2, while this is a specific rebel group, I think you can extrapolate it out to the rebellion at large. They are a little more organized, but still have a ways to go. Many of them are inexperienced, not good at following the chain of command and working within a system. They aren't a well-operating machine yet that are able to pose any kind of real dangerous threat to the Empire at large. And the show continues with this progression as the show goes on. By Arc 3, they are starting to become more organized, and many different people are coming together. By Arc 4, they are essentially the same rebellion that we saw in Rogue One and A New Hope, pulling off their first major victories against the Empire and finally sinking their teeth into the Empire at large, and able to sustain open warfare. These details may be small, but they go a long way in making the overarching story of the Star Wars galaxy a deeply complex and congruent narrative. So with all that said, I'm going to give episode 6 an 8 out of 10. Another great episode for the season. Now that we've reached the end of Arc 2, I think most would agree that the second arc of Season 2 is a step up from the first arc in almost every way. Arc 1 had some stuff in it that myself and others just weren't too fond of. There was a lot of stuff that felt pretty pointless, and just overall the writing was not as clean or good. That's not the case in Arc 2. There wasn't much of anything that stuck out as details I didn't like. And if there was, I made sure to point them out because they were far and few between. Almost every single scene, plotline, even piece of dialogue is good or even great. After viewing the second arc, I think myself and everyone else was able to take a big sigh of relief, because it was pretty clear that we were back on track. It was a bit of a bumpy start with Arc 1, especially coming off the back of Season 1, which was really good, but Arc 2 was able to smooth us out again, and actually start to crescendo. You can tell that throughout the arc that we are starting to build, and build, and build to some sort of explosion in the latter half of the season. And that's what this arc does so well. Sure, episodes 4 through 6 might be dubbed the setup arc, but it's the setup that needed to happen, and I am certainly grateful for it. And with that, that's just about going to do it for today. For those of you who have stuck around to the end of the video, as always, I express my thanks for taking the time to listen to some of my thoughts. And if you enjoyed, please consider leaving a like and hitting that subscribe button. These videos take a while to script out and make, so any support would be greatly appreciated. And finally, make sure to take to the comments below to let me know your guys' thoughts on episode 6. Did you like it as much as me? Perhaps not. What did you think worked, and what were some of the things that you think didn't work? And since episode 6 rounds off the end of the second arc, feel free to let me know your guys' thoughts on Arc 2 as a whole. As always, I will be interested to hear what you guys have to say. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I will see you guys in the next one.